drives your fear? We're all afraid of something, but what encourages it to grow? What stops you from moving past it? And more importantly, how do you react to it? Do you cower and run from the things that frighten you? Do you stand up and face it with the intention of conquering it? Or do you pretend it simply isn't there? Because you pretend it isn't there, then you don't have to face it, and you don't have to cower. Then you can proclaim yourself above all the things that would scare normal people. You can pretend you don't have the frailties and insecurities that make all of us human. You're more evolved, and everyone just needs to get on your wavelength. But we all know that's a lie. A fear wrapped in arrogance and denial, designed to protect you from the truth. And that is a truth you will avoid acknowledging at any cost, no matter how much damage you cause in the process. And I could think of no better way to explore that fear than with the master of fear himself. No, not that one, yet. I mean Sinestro, the wielder of the fear-inducing yellow lantern and the leader of the Sinestro Corps. Sinestro, for those not aware, is a longtime nemesis of the Green Lantern Hal Jordan, the first human member of the intergalactic police force, the Green Lantern Corps. The Green Lantern Corps is an organization made up of individuals from across the universe who all wield its most powerful weapon, the Green Lantern Rain. A Green Lantern Rain is fueled by an individual's willpower, which is funneled through the rain to create any construct they can imagine. The more willpower you have, the stronger constructs you can create, with the only limitation being the user's imagination and the rain's charge. Well, it's not entirely true. The rain does have one weakness. For years, it didn't work on the color yellow for reasons we'll get into. But the Green Lantern Corps isn't something you can just enlist in. You have to be chosen by a Green Lantern Rain, which seeks out people who have the ability to overcome great fear. Sidebar, I've never realized how complicated explaining GL lore was until I had to sit down and write this, but I digress. From the very beginning, Sinestro thought very highly of himself due to the fact that he was a highly decorated member of the Green Lantern Corps, and often regarded as the greatest among them. This was due in no small part that the sector of the universe he was tasked with protecting, his homeworld of Corridor, is called the most orderly sector of all the universe. As a result, Sinestro sees himself as superior to his fellow Green Lanterns, and doesn't really show respect or even interest in any of them with one exception, his only friend and mentor, Abin Sur. Abin Sur was the Green Lantern of Sector 2814, also known as a sector that contains Earth. Abin Sur has become obsessed with a group of aliens called the Inversions, imprisoned on the planet Yasmalt, who foretold of a prophecy known as the Blackest Night. This was a prophecy the Corps' leaders, known as the Guardians, refused to discuss or even acknowledge. The Inversions also foretold that Abin Sur's reign will fail him when he needs it most. So acting out of fear and paranoia, Abin Sur takes one of the Inversions, Atrocitus, into a spaceship to lead him to the alleged birthplace of the Blackest Night. He tells Sinestro about the prophecy, but he dismisses it and also expresses concern that he's even using a ship, since his ring can fly him and Atrocitus around the galaxy with ease. But Abin Sur pushes on, and Atrocitus takes his chance. Because in choosing to use a spaceship over his reign, Abin Sur has allowed himself to feel fear, which makes his willpower weaken and allows Atrocitus to break free from his bonds. The resulting struggle forces Abin Sur to crash land on Earth, just outside Coast City, California. Realizing he won't survive his injuries, Abin Sur sends out his reign to find a replacement, and finds in the former hotshot pilot, Hal Jordan, making him the first human Green Lantern. Dear Lord, I was not expecting to spend this much time just setting up the lore, so sorry longtime Green Lantern fans annoyed that I spent this much time explaining stuff you already know, and you're welcome everybody else. Anyway, the death of Abin Sur and the rise of his successor obviously gets Sinestro's attention, and convinces him to take Abin Sur's fears seriously enough to investigate. So he too goes to Earth, and quickly decides that Hal Jordan should be directly under his supervision. Hal isn't a big fan of authority in general, so the two naturally butt heads pretty much immediately, as Hal consistently questions his authority and the supposed limitations of the Green Lantern Corps. He takes particular interest as to why the rains don't seem to work on yellow, but no one has an answer. As much as Sinestro is annoyed by Hal's brash nature, consistent disrespect, and utter recklessness, he soon comes to respect him. That's because Hal is an independent thinker, something Sinestro takes great pride in being as well. And as such, he sees Hal as someone who he could guide and even trust, because he won't follow the Guardians blindly like so many of his fellow Lanterns. This mutual respect eventually turns into an actual friendship, or at least as much of a friendship as these two are capable of having, as they continue to work together after they avenge Abin Sur's death. But that all changes when Sinestro decides to bring Hal to his sector, to show him how a Lantern really does it. When he gets to Sinestro's homeworld of Corridor, he's disturbed to discover that Sinestro has turned his home into an absolute dictatorship, the entire planet under Sinestro's rule. Sinestro maintains his rule through weaponized fear, keeping his people subjugated through violence and torture. But he insists that all of this is necessary. All of it must be done to maintain peace. Despite Hal's initial attempt to protect Sinestro, his corruption is eventually exposed, resulting in him getting dishonorably discharged from the Corps after Hal testifies against him. Sinestro vows revenge and eventually crafts a yellow power reign to counter the green, although he had little knowledge of what he actually had at the time. He would eventually discover the truth years later after he's imprisoned in the Central Power Battery, the main source of power for all Green Lantern reigns. There, he encounters Parallax, an ancient entity trapped in the battery that is a living embodiment of fear, and is the source of the Green Lantern's weakness to yellow. As it turns out, the willpower that the Green Lanterns tap into is only one of many different emotions that beings can channel, each with an ancient entity like Parallax that acts as a power source, and each with their own designated color. Green for willpower, yellow for fear, pink for love, red for rage, orange for greed, and purple for compassion. And much like Green Lanterns, only beings who are strong in any one of these emotions is capable of wielding its power. There's a lot more we can go into, but I've already spent an obscene amount of time going over lore already, and I'm just going to assume you guys get the gist by this point. So while Hal Jordan has the ability to overcome great fear and wields a Green Lantern ring, Sinestro has the ability to instill great fear and wields a Yellow Lantern ring, eventually creating a Corps of his own known as the Sinestro Corps. And thus, the once greatest Green Lantern, responsible for bringing peace and order to the universe, now spreads fear with an army of sycophantic murderers. But does Sinestro really have the ability to instill great fear? Or is he secretly driven by it? Which of course begs the question, what is Sinestro afraid of? What would drive him to choose the route of fear to achieve his ultimate goals? Well, what else drives a proud man to double down on everything he's ever done despite his failures and despite the rejection he receives because of it? The fear of being wrong. But why is being wrong such a terrifying proposition for Sinestro, or anyone for that matter? One might assume the reason would be pride and ego, so confident in how they think and feel about everything that the thought of being wrong is simply not one that occurs to them. But while pride and ego do play a heavy role in why this fear develops, it's actually not the whole reason. The real reason some people are so afraid of being wrong is the same reason they will keep people at arm's length with their supposed intellect: the fear of vulnerability. Because you can only really be intimate with someone and develop the kind of personal connections that matter when you accept the fact that it's not all about you. And that requires you to accept that you're not always right about everything. But when you do that, that also opens you up to so many of life's greatest pains: crushed hope, disappointment, and loss, just to name a few. And some people just can't handle that. They're not capable. The risk is too high. So they create this bubble, this worldview, this need. This undying need to be right about everything. Because when you're simply right about everything, you don't need to be challenged. You don't need objection, and you don't need to feel the crushing weight when things don't go the way you wanted. You're just right, and no one can take that away from you. And if anyone tries to prove you wrong, you don't debate them, you silence. Because anyone that suggests differently is just ignorant or stupid, and they need to be shown the right way. Your way. But it's not how reality works, is it? And the real reason people who need to be right won't allow room for others is because to actually listen to what others have to say with any form of openness and objectivity leaves room to pop this bubble they've created. This will then force them to question everything all over again, and all that does is leave them confused and lost, with their entire worldview now under question. In Sinestro's case, the entire reason he's become the symbol of fear, the reason he's his worldview be the right one, is because every time he's ever been wrong, he loses something dear. See, Sinestro's homeworld and his friendship with Abin Sur weren't the only precious things to him that he lost before becoming a Yellow Lantern. He also had a wife, Arin Sur, Abin Sur's sister, who lived with him on Korugar, and they even had a daughter together. He was happy. He had everything he wanted. His first great loss is Abin Sur, who dies because he tries to stop a prophecy Sinestro thought was nonsense. Abin Sur was right, and Sinestro was wrong. So Sinestro becomes more paranoid, more stubborn, and his efforts to keep Korugar a peaceful world become more and more extreme. The Green Lantern Corps said he is the greatest Green Lantern, and his sector is the most orderly in the universe. This would remain true. He needed it to remain true. But the more extreme Sinestro's methods become, the more his people rebel, resulting in Arin Sur sending their daughter away shortly before a suicide bomber results in her death. But will Sinestro admit he was wrong again, that his extreme measures led to nothing except more bloodshed and loss? No, he just doubles down. crushes all resistance, and establishes a dictatorship on the world he loves the most. His worldview remains true. Korugar remains orderly. He is still the greatest Green Lantern. He didn't lose his wife, daughter, and best friend for nothing. But then in comes Hal Jordan, hotshot newbie, ignorant whelp who Sinestro was foolish enough to believe was his friend and ally. Because, just like himself, Hal also believes in the core principles of the Green Lanterns, and what a force of good it can be for the universe. Like Sinestro, he sees the lies of the Guardians for what they are. Surely he would understand, right? Surely he would see his grand vision for the universe for what it is. But he doesn't. He testifies against him and leaves him to rot. Sinestro was wrong again, and he lost the home he worked so hard to defend and the only friend he had left. You would think that would force someone to sit down and reflect on what he did wrong and how he got here, but that's not Sinestro, is it? Because it can't have been his fault. No, it had to be everyone else's fault. They couldn't see what he sees. They couldn't see what he was doing. And everything he could have accomplished, everything he would have accomplished, a peaceful, orderly universe for all. And thus he declares war on the Green Lantern Corps and on Hal Jordan, who now represents all the ways in which Sinestro has failed, all the ways in which he was wrong, and the last person he let himself trust before being hurt again. And if he can defeat Hal Jordan once and for all, he can finally declare that he was objectively right. His point has been made. His views and actions have all been vindicated and justified. Because that's what Sinestro wants, after all, to prove a point, to prove he was right. Everything he does is to prove that his methods within the Green Lantern Corps were the correct ones, and he refuses to let it go. He needs to be right. His pain has to mean something. Because if he's wrong, that means all of it meant nothing, and he can't live with that. Hell, this obsession with making the universe see his vision is no more clear than with the Sinestro Corps War, an event in which he led the Yellow Lanterns in a bloody campaign to destroy the Green Lantern Corps. But he didn't actually want to destroy them. What he really wanted was to convince the Guardians that they needed to enable lethal force within the Green Lantern Corps. He initiated an entire war in which thousands died, including many of his own soldiers, just so the Guardians would remove an edict that said the Green Lanterns cannot kill. He did it so the Green Lantern Corps would just become a little bit more like him. He lost the battle, but won the war. And boy, does he let everyone know he did too. And he continues to try to force his will on the entire universe every opportunity he gets, even when he is forced to work with Hal again. Including, but not limited to, trying to possess multiple emotional entities on multiple occasions, and in trying to take the White Lantern, most powerful of the bunch, before having to concede he couldn't even lift it. The only time he seems to express any form of flexibility, where he actually starts to acknowledge what he's refused to up to this point, is when he's made his Green Lantern again and partners up with Hal. It's a long story. He does so because, as much as he hates to admit it, Hal is the only one he can trust and has the willpower to effect genuine change. But as the two continue to work together again, something else begins to change. Hal is now in a position where he can actively call Sinestro out on his bullshit, and he's forced to listen. He's forced to confront the victims he left behind on Korugar and be directly confronted on his mistakes and failures. Hell, he even apologizes. And while he still resists every step of the way, Sinestro starts to listen to what he's being told. He starts to really see what his actions have wrought. And that accumulates on one moment, a moment where he is put in a position that forces him to question his methods. On the planet of the Indigo Tribe, another name for the Purple Lanterns, he tries to threaten the creator of the tribe into doing his bidding, but Hal stops him, saying that fear won't work. You're not right this time. And in a moment that surprises everyone, Sinestro actually listens and admits that he's wrong. And from that point forward, Sinestro seemingly starts to change, starts to actually try to make up for everything he's done, and become the Lantern he used to be. But it isn't long before tragedy strikes again, as the greatest threat known as the First Lantern emerges, looking for strong sources of motion to draw power from so he can rewrite the universe, but again, long story. And he sets his eyes on Korugar, because not only is it a source of great fear due to Sinestro's actions, but also a source of great hope for his attempts to redeem himself. All of which accumulates in the destruction of Korugar, leaving Sinestro alone, broken, and without the one thing he dedicated his life to protecting. And once again, Sinestro doubles down. His only mistake was in recognizing he could make mistakes. He was right all along, and he was foolish for doubting himself. So he regains the Yellow Lantern reign and even possesses Parallax to fully become the vision of fear he so openly embraced. In rage and hate, he kills all of the Guardians, blaming them for the destruction of his home. Knowing that there's no point in fighting anymore, Hal lets him go, but not before asking one last question. Were they ever truly friends? But Sinestro replies, "That's the tragedy of all this, Jordan. We'll always be friends." In the end, Sinestro was capable of change. He was capable of listening and growing. He could be reached by people he trusted and people he allowed himself to open up to. But the minute pain reached him again, he immediately reverted back to the need. There's been some debate about what Sinestro's last words to Hal actually mean, but my interpretation is simple. They'll always be friends because Hal is the only one Sinestro will even remotely listen to. And the tragedy is it's not enough. He can't change. He won't change. Because doing so would mean he would need to confront his fear of being wrong. And every time he has done so, he has lost. He can never let go of his viewpoint. He will never see it as wrong and hateful and will consistently lead to death. And while the consequences for other people holding this fear may not be as severe, although there are also more than a few that are, the fear of confronting the possibility of being wrong is simply too much for so many people, and that's tragic. Because human beings are meant to be continuously learning, to be continuously discovering, to always challenge our notion on the world and the people in it. But for those too afraid to question their own ideology, that possibility has now become so narrow, so confining, with the only possibility for learning being whatever information they can find that directly supports what they want to believe, whether it's true or not. Now, just so my message isn't misappropriated by hate mongers, I'm explicitly listing bigots, racists, sexists, alt-right supporters, and anyone that supports any group whose name is something gator in this category, along with any other hate group I failed to mention. Now, it's important to note that not everyone who has this need to be right feels as such due to tragic circumstances. Some certainly do, but others are simply raised with a certain set of beliefs and are afraid of challenging them, while others feel a need to maintain some kind of social standard. Whatever the case may be, they are all in the wrong because real growth and change, the kind that matters and lasts, does not come from the closed-minded. But let's not even get that grandiose. On an individual level, we owe it to ourselves and the people around us to keep seeking out knowledge, to constantly question and challenge what we think and believe. Because only then can we grow as people, and that's something we should always strive to do. But unfortunately, many choose not to. Many are way too comfortable set in their ways, where they don't have to struggle and there's no expectation to be better. Where they only talk with people who agree with them and push out anyone that dares to tell them no. And that is such an isolated, lonely way of life, but it's a way of life that's easy to get used to because then you know exactly what to expect. There's no surprises when you refuse to learn anything new, and therefore, no disappointment to be found. Or worse yet, you'll find the people who are so sure of what they think and believe that they'll try to push that viewpoint on everyone else. So afraid of dissenting opinions that the thought that one can even exist is just intolerable to them. Even if it's a topic that ultimately does not matter, looking at you fandoms. These are the bad faith arguers, the people who have absolutely zero interest in engaging in anything remotely resembling a respectful conversation. They have no interest in actually listening to other people's perspective. They just want to put them down until they shut up. While this is certainly something you can see pretty easily now if you ever find yourself on any form of social media, this is hardly a new problem. Historically speaking, these are the same kind of people who resist necessary change and will only make forward progress kicking and screaming like tantruming children. And as a result, these closed-minded groups always end up on the wrong side of history. Granted, the reason these people resist any challenge to their beliefs tend to go a lot deeper than "I'm afraid of being wrong," but the attitude and reaction is pretty uniformly the same. People who need to be right can and will put down anyone and everyone to maintain that need. And they hold themselves and everyone else back from being truly great. Because being truly great and being a true leader, or even just a good person, does not come from being right. It does not come from proving everyone else wrong. It doesn't come from not listening. Being great isn't about being right, it's about doing right. It's about listening and learning from people with different perspectives from you. It's about listening to people who are smarter than you. It's about treating others with respect and challenging yourself to meet people where they're at. Sometimes that can mean something as big as joining a protest or something as small as apologizing during a fight. And that's not to say you have to agree with everyone, and some people just aren't worth listening to. Please refer back to the aforementioned list of intolerant groups. But if you want to be better, if you want to become the person you feel you should be, or the person you feel others should see you as, the only way you're going to get that is to be the one who listens and follows through. The one who understands when it is important to speak and when it's important to give others the floor. The one who never stops challenging themselves and never stops trying to learn. Sinestro's entire way of life is dependent on everyone seeing his ideology as the only one. But that's not how the real world works. It's our job to never settle for one ideology, to not be afraid of expanding our minds. And if you can do that, if you can live with the disappointment and pain being wrong can and will bring, then maybe you can be a leader truly without fear.